and I did have a couple of visuals, obviously. Like I was in the desert in one of these instances, and there was a glass uh, liquor bottle in the desert, and then all of a sudden, the liquor bottle disintegrated into the sand. And I just thought that was, I thought it was corny, cliche. I'm like, I couldn't have thought of like a more clever thing in my subconscious. Like I was embarrassed about that. And I didn't want to tell the doctors. I'm like, they don't need to know about this.
Mr. Kostas, this is a first for this show. You're a friend. I've known you for years, and I've wanted to do this interview for pretty much ever since I met you. Welcome to the show, man. Thanks for doing this.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm very excited about this one. So looking forward to it.
Thanks, buddy. Maybe we can start with the background story. I'd love to give ample time to kind of learn the story of you as a younger man, as a teenager, and in your 20s. Maybe we can just start with having you shed some light on, your earlier years relationship to alcohol, specifically, and what what your lifestyle was like, what you were like back in the day. Maybe we can just keep it open ended to start, and
You really?
move the conversation from there.
Um, yeah, I mean those. So I grew up in Manhattan, and this was like the early 2000s. I was born 1990, so I was going out when I was like 13, around 12, 13.
Hmm.
Um, and New York was awesome back then. I mean, it was they had just banned smoking indoors under Bloomberg, but if you knew the right bars, they'd shut the windows and they'd let you smoke after midnight.
Hmm.
So, but it was uh, it was a fun time. It was great, and that's when I started drinking. And it, I mean, my friends and I would, sneak into either bars or we'd go to restaurants that weren't doing too well, that weren't that busy,
Hmm.
and so we'd, go there, order some food, and order a lot more drinks. Um, and but that's kind of how it was growing up in New York. You'd find the places that didn't really, they weren't too strict on IDs, or they didn't, they're more lenient.
Hmm.
Um, and we gravitate towards that. But the difference is a lot like most of the folks I was doing this with, they could kind of turn it on and turn it off. Whereas I never understood. I loved feeling like that. I'm like, this is great. I love how alcohol made me feel. I'm like, why wouldn't I never understood why you would just limit it to a Friday or a Saturday night. It didn't make sense. I was like, this would make class more interesting. This would
Hmm.
make, you know, doing the laundry more interesting. I just don't understand why people aren't constantly drinking.
Hmm.
And and kind of to this day, I'm like, I still I don't drink anymore, obviously, but like when I see someone they just have like one drink and it's been there and the ice is melted, it's been there for like an hour. I'm like, why even order it? Like, I still don't understand that.
Hmm.
But so I knew like at an early age, I was a little different.
Hmm.
That and I would build up the tolerance because I was drinking more than everyone else. Um, so that was noticeable too, where I would drink all these, you know, amounts of alcohol um, and way more than my peers at the time. So that was also uh, kind of eye opening too. That I was just kind of on a fast track to crashing and burning if I didn't do anything about it. And but on the other hand, I'm such a hypochondriac that I would tell my doctor, and I'm like a teenager at this point, and I'm like brutally honest with the guy, and he's like, "Yeah, this is." I think it was my pediatrician at the time. I was still seeing my pediatrician. He's like, "Yeah, I don't think this is normal." He's like, "You should probably." I had like a 3-year-old toddler waiting for the next appointment to get in, and he's telling me, "Yeah, you should probably go to an AA meeting." And gave me a lollipop on the way out,
Mm.
um, and so I checked out the AA meeting. He's like, check it out, see if anything resonates, if anything, if you think this is relevant at all. So I went to an AA meeting at 16, and a lot of these people that were in this particular meeting, but I've been to hundreds of meetings over the years, and it's pretty common that we had similar starts,
Mm.
where we'd be drinking we started at a young age. It's a progressive disease, so you're building up tolerance, and so I was like, so I'm like, I'm not there yet with the DUI there, because they'd say all the, I was drinking at 10, and then this, and then I got arrested, and then a lot of them got DUIs at some point in their lives. Thank
Mm.
God I didn't get my license till I was like 28 or something, because I didn't need it in the city. But I dodged another bullet with that, because who wouldn't know? I mean, if I had a license. But so a couple of those stories, I'm like, okay, I probably will need to stop at some point, but I'm fine now.
Mm.
So I'd still, I'd try to monitor it, but every time I drank, I would black out. So it was just tough.
Mm.
I could never, I'd always think I'm going out for like one or two drinks. And I don't know but I'd convince myself, I'm like, tonight's the night. I'm gonna only do maybe 2 drinks. I'll be on great behavior. And I mean, most of the time I'd be fine. I wouldn't, but I just waking up the next morning after a blackout, and I'm like, oh my God, did I do something like terrible? What did I do? And then I'd have to call my friends or something just to get a peace of mind. And they're like, no, you didn't remember any of it. Like, you were fine. I didn't know you were like blacked out. You're fine. Other instances though, they were like, yeah, you should call, this person and apologize.
Yeah.
But those were few and far between. So
Did you,
I was
John,
lucky about that.
did you view the drinking at that time as a problem?
I Yeah, I thought it was a little problematic. But I was still in the so yeah, like when I mean, I was kind of so it's tough because it's subjective in a way where the person with, the alcoholism or the drug use or a lot of those folks are just kind of in denial, or, they'll, like when I was on and off drinking and trying to stop drinking, I'd justify relapsing by, I shouldn't feel that bad. I'm still young. I'm in my early 20s. Um, I'll get my act together down the road. Like, I don't have kids. I don't have, a wife. I'm fine. Like, I can do whatever I want right
Mm.
now. So that's how I would justify that when I'd like start drinking again. Like, yeah, I'm still young, I'm fine. But yeah, I viewed it as I viewed it as an issue. I viewed it as a problem, but one that kind of came with the territory because I was going to keep living that lifestyle. So I didn't see it as big of a problem as I saw it later on. Like, okay, maybe it is time that I just try to give it up altogether. So yeah, I was aware of it, but I think more subconsciously too, because I was going through, like, I'd be going to AA meetings throughout that whole time. I was, 16 to like 24, leading up to that clinical trial. I was going to different doctors just to figure out like how, like, substance use specialists, and so I was doing all of that. I checked into rehab to try to stop. So I did want to stop, but like when I was a teenager, I was like, this could be problematic. But like a lot of the stuff I did was just, it was kind of like everyone was having a good time too. So the people I was with, like they kind of liked that too. Like it was entertaining. Um, like if you think I'm crazy now, you should have seen me
Yeah.
when I was drinking. But so it in a weird way, it was kind of like uh, it wasn't that problematic. It was more rewarding in a weird way, and just based on our society too, like glorifying alcoholism. It's like a lot of TV shows, a lot of movies, a lot of comedy just
Mm.
looks at that in a funny way, when it's actually like when you actually see the real side of it. It's like breaking up families, it's killing people, it's killing others in drunk driving accidents and like other accidents. Like, so it's it's interesting how our society sees alcohol and alcoholism. But I was looking at alcoholism back then as kind of like, it's kind of funny, like a, lovable guy who's just getting way too drunk, but he's fine. All so,
Were you
but that,
waking up?
unfortunately,
Were you waking
yeah.
up, John, in the morning with like, I don't know how well you remember kind of the lived experience of that time in your life, but like with extreme cravings from the jump when you're up in the morning for alcohol consumption. Psychologically, what do you remember about that time in your life of what kept pulling you back into, the bar scene and the extreme drinking?
Oh, so that's a good question. So it was very easy for me to stop in like week or two increments,
Hmm.
anywhere from like a few days to, or even like a week to maybe a couple weeks, a few weeks, because I'd have so much remorse after going out and just getting completely hammered. And I'd wake up, I'd have a physical hangover, I'd have what my friends call mental hangover. I've heard the term hangxiety,
Mm-hmm.
like a hangover and anxiety together. That's pretty accurate. Um, so I would just feel, physically and mentally, I was just like, oh my God, like what the hell am I doing? And I felt like a bad person. Like I felt guilty. I felt like I did something really bad, when in reality I just drank, and didn't even do anything bad that like it got. I was just drinking by myself to kind of limit, because I was always concerned. Oh man, am I gonna like just lash out at someone, or am I gonna? And that never really happened.
Mm.
It was just in the back of my mind when I'm on autopilot and I don't know what's going on. But that was one of my biggest fears. Like, am I going to just do something really like bad that I'm going to regret? So I'd wake up and I'm just running around with the worst case scenarios. But I'm like, I just drank by myself
Hmm.
at home. I didn't do any of that. So like I would start doing that to just limit any of those variables from getting into the equation. But I'd still feel, even if I knew I was just harming myself with the booze, I would still feel guilty after that. So, but then it's just like, and then I'd stop for a few days or a few weeks, and then I would just be bored. And then I'd be like, and then I back to the subjective, me justifying my drinking. I'd go back to, I've been pretty good the last couple of days or the last few weeks. And I should, I'm like, why not? And somehow I'd convince myself it would just be a couple of drinks, and I'm not gonna drink enough to get blackout. I'll drink enough to get a good buzz going.
Hmm.
But so, but it's the same story. It's like Groundhog Day
Hmm.
with Bill Murray. So it's just like the same thing over and over again. And then I think, doing that enough times, and I don't think I'm alone with like other alcoholics that have tried different, like you try all these different equations to see if you could drink normally or socially without getting overboard. Um, and I pretty much did it all. Like I've heard of people switching to beer. I've heard of people drinking a glass of water in between. I would just be drinking way more water. I'd be,
Hmm.
hydrating for a marathon at
Hmm.
that point. I'm not going to limit my intake of alcohol. I'm just going to up my water intake. So just like all these different, because a lot of us, myself included, just love drinking so much
Hmm.
that it was almost impossible to think of a world where you'd have to give it up forever. And
Right.
I think that's also why still a lot of people are very, um, most people with substance use issues don't seek help. So, and I think that's a big reason, because you're telling someone they can't do the thing that they do the most and the thing that they love to do,
Hmm.
um, or the thing that they're just dependent on. I don't know if they love to do it anymore or not. Probably not if they're at that point. But you're telling them they can never do it ever again. And some people are. I mean, I was so desperate that I was like, yeah, fine. Like, yeah, I don't want to do this ever again. But a lot of people are, that's kind of scary coming to terms with that. And they're like, but I mean, you know, I can't do this every other weekend, or I can't do this once a month, or
Hmm.
so. And the truth is, most people can't, because if they do that, then they're just back in that vicious cycle that's hard to break out of again. So
For you,
until
for
these
you
clinical
personally, though,
trials,
it sounds
yeah.
like, am I right in understanding? And if I'm not, please correct me, that it was mostly, an option for you to mitigate boredom, and just the internal experience of being drunk was, or drinking, having alcohol in your system was just so much more enjoyable than sober life.
Oh yeah, I loved it. I mean, it that was my favorite thing to do. I loved how it made me feel. I think I was just bored, which is weird to say,
Hmm.
because I was in a city where there's a lot going on, and um, but it wasn't like no trauma or anything. When I had a great childhood, great parents that were always present, great sister, great friends. So, but when I had alcohol early on, I was just like, wow, this is great. Um, not, really not a care in the world, and
Hmm.
to just hang out. Everyone's having a good time. Who wouldn't want to? It was like I was at the Copacabana every weekend hanging out. That's how it felt great.
Do you think it
So
was
yeah,
moving from a kind of bland, normal internal psychological life to one that, like you said, was your favorite thing to do, just not a care in the world, a much more pleasurable experience? Or, in retrospect now, do you look back and think that you were depressed or mildly depressed or not? How do you make sense of that?
I I think it was more anxiety. I know there was a lot of stress growing up, and I didn't.
Hmm.
I talked to this basically a kid um, who grew up in the city, and I was talking to him. He's in college now, so he's young. Uh, but until I talked to him recently, like within the last year or something, and he said just the whole school system, the whole studying for the SSATs for boarding school, or and then the SATs for college, and like all of that. And you're in New York where it's highly competitive, where it's per capita one of the most competitive
Hmm.
places in the world professionally, if not the most. And then you're getting in, the kids of these people that are in highly competitive environments too. And we're just all in these schools together. I mean, it's quite the environment, and it is tough for a younger person. And I never really realized that. And I think, and I'm obviously not a doctor, but I was like, I just remember like being sick to my stomach some days just from school. And this was before the drinking.
Hmm.
I mean, just really bad anxiety. Like, you think if you fail a test, your life's over. Like, you're not getting in the best high school you want, and then you're not getting into the best college. And then if you don't get into a good college, forget about, living a professional life, and forget about doing well
Hmm.
after school. I mean, so, but these were the types of things, you know, I was thinking, and I know a lot of my friends were thinking too, of just like our lives could be over if we don't
Yeah.
do well in school. And I wasn't, the best student, believe it or not. um, so I mean, I was, and then I started focusing on the partying.
Hmm.
So that kind of doubled down on the anxiety too. Um, but I think it was more that in these high pressured, I mean, you got little kids, and you're throwing them in these like pressure cookers. It's tough. But until that kid identified that as a problem, and then I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, I dealt with that too. It sounds worse now. It
Hmm.
didn't. It didn't even sound as bad when I was um, there, but I was like that. I think that did have something to do with it.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that, and I can empathize with that in many ways, that it was more a relief from, the boredom slash the low level or medium level anxiety that is a part of being in a, consistently competitive environment when you're still quite young. Is that fair, a fair assessment of some of the incentive or a large part of the incentive for the drinking in the first place?
I think so. Kind of like the stockbroker or something taking that like cliche first drink after we're like going home, opening up the scotch bottle, to kind of like detach from a stressful job and work environment. I think it did. I mean, these were just like pleasant distractions as a kid, like just going out and having fun with your friends to take away from the, you know, that life in school and like even because I love summer and summer is like a terrible time of year in New York, as you are well aware.
Yeah.
But I still love it, even though the weather is bad. And I think that's just because of nostalgia. And then I realized I hate the fall.
Mm.
And even though the fall weather is great, that's when we were all getting back to school.
Mm.
So I think that still kind of sticks with me of like, wow, I always hated that, even because you could, go out at certain times of a year blindfolded and you'd know what season it is, like just from not just like temperature wise, but like the smells on the street and, the trees, the flowers, the rain. So just feeling that fall weather coming along, I'm just like, oh man, this is kind of depressing.
Yeah.
But
You know what's coming. You know the intensity of what's coming
yeah,
and the pressure. Yeah.
yeah. So I think, and it took me, what is I'm 33 now. I left there at 18. So I mean, it took me some years, and if I hadn't talked to this kid, I don't think I would have put it together. Not certainly not this soon, but at all maybe.
Yeah.
But it's something that you're just so used to in this, and you dealt with it too, right? You mentioned. So I mean, it's tough to put that on kids.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I also don't think I was aware of just how tense I was all the time in attempting to perform, which is what a lot of what high intensity middle school and especially high school becomes, where, like you said, I definitely had this view that if you don't do well in school, if you don't get into a great college, essentially like your future prospects are gone. And there's just this, internal need to try to perform and try to hold yourself to a high standard, which is, it takes a lot of effort and I think is difficult, especially when you're young and awkward and don't have a good sense of yourself or an accurate understanding of how long life really is and how high school is not all that it's cracked up to be in so many ways. You talked about the
Yeah.
fact that you went to AA, I think as a teenager. How did you know, or I guess when did you personally believe like this is a real problem for you? Was it when you couldn't stop? Was it when you noticed a behavior shift that you were embarrassed by? When did you begin to personally accept that this is something that's going to be a really difficult for you?
Yeah, when I try to like slow down, and because I was either drinking or I was not drinking. There was
Mm.
no in between. And before I try to stop drinking altogether and went that route, I obviously try to cut back. And it was just, I think that was more, I don't know if I've ever really done that because I would always try to say, I'm just going to stick with this number of drinks or I'll try to, but it's just tough because then you'd have a few and then you'd have a couple. Yeah, I would have a few and I wouldn't feel anything, and then I have a few more, wouldn't really feel much. And then I would just go from like not feeling anything to blackout drunk in like maybe one drink, it felt like. Um, so it was tough. And I was drinking pretty quickly too, so it wouldn't hit me
Mm.
yet. So um, it, that, trying to get a handle on it is when I realized that's going to be an issue, and I'm probably not going to be able to do this if I wanted to succeed in life. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to find a career I loved. I wanted to be good at it, whatever it was, and I wanted to just be successful in that way. And I cared more about that than drinking. And I knew I couldn't be productive if I were drinking. So I had to give one up. And
Mm.
I was like, I'm not, I don't want to just waste my life away. So I got to figure this out.
And I know, we talked about the AA attempts, and, in knowing you for a couple of years now, I mean, my understanding is that the attempt to go into this NYU trial, which I know we'll talk about, was my understanding was that it was really like a Hail Mary for you, and that you had
Yeah.
tried everything else. And I wonder if it might be helpful for people listening to this to hear what all you did try, and why your, parents, and this is not that long ago, but it was, you know, for so many people, this kind of move to try a psychedelic to break an addiction just seems crazy. Um,
Yeah.
what did you try before you and your family decided that this is something worth pursuing?
So AA and hundreds of meetings, because I did 90, they call it 90 and 90. It's,
Mm.
you do 90 meetings in your first 90 days. So your first 3 months of AA, you do a meeting every single day.
Mm.
And I did that a couple of times. And so I've done that. I mean, hundreds of AA meetings, um, and then I saw all these, and I'm in New York, so best doctors, you have, a full range of different outpatient clinics, specialists. I mean, you name it, it's all here. So I was lucky enough, with that. So I saw different substance use counselors, different, you know, MDs, psychiatrists specializing in alcoholism. They would, a few of them gave me prescriptions for um, pharmaceuticals that would help curb my drinking
Mm.
or curb my cravings for alcohol. But when I took that, I was like, I need at least like 12 beer. Like I would get a full case of beer, and I would start drinking them, and then after like the second or third one, like pretty early on, I wouldn't really want to drink it. So it was kind of working.
Mm.
But then like my muscle memory or whatever it was, I was like, no, but I need like X amount to really get a buzz going. So I would force these drinks. So that didn't work, at least for me. And there was another pill prescription that they gave me, which you would take, and you take it like once a week or something, but it would make you sick if you ingested any alcohol.
Mm.
So you'd like break out in rashes and like violently throw up. Like I've heard terrible stories about it, so I never drank on it, but it never did it never addressed your cravings. So it's like putting a chocolate cake in front of a diabetic, telling them don't eat it,
Mm.
um, or you're going to get sick.
Yeah.
So that, um, and obviously rehab. I did inpatient and outpatient. So really, like everything, we exhausted all of our options, and tried everything available. And I was lucky enough to have great parents that were supportive and, trying to get me the best care that was around. So, but still, even with that, these treatments, they didn't work for me. And then what I realized is, okay, I was treatment resistant, but is what I was categorized as. But so are most people
Mm.
looking for help. If treatment works for like 5-10% of people, the other 90% are treatment resistant, I guess, or you
Mm.
just have a terrible method.
Mm.
And we need more solutions that maybe work for the majority of folks seeking help.
And just to clarify on some of that, so despite all of the work, despite all of the resources that you had in the time you'd put into going out to all these meetings and everything else you just mentioned, the cravings, if I'm understanding correctly, never subsided, nor did the drinking subside. And if that is correct, I'd love to hear about, where you were before this NYU trial, just the trajectory of where you think your life was headed at that point. If not for that trial, where do you think you would have ended up based upon a lot of the details that you just spoke about?
Oh, well, I mean, according to the doctors, I'd be dead if I kept drinking the way I was drinking. Um, at this point in my life, yeah, it never, and I think that was the most um, frustrating part of it. It's the cravings and these temptations that you can't overcome. And they're just driving you nuts, and that's all you're thinking about all day. Um and and that's really tough, because like there'd be days where I wouldn't drink, but I thought about drinking, and it was really tough not to drink. But that just keeps beating you down, and it wears on you over time, and it doesn't take that long for a lot of people. It didn't
Mm.
for me. And it's just wearing you down. And the weird thing is, I'm pretty like disciplined, and I have pretty good willpower in everything else.
Mm.
Like if I know I need to do something, I'll focus on that, and I'm good at addressing things and seeing things through. But with this, it was just, willpower is not really the skill that you need to overcome this stuff, I think, for most people.
Mm.
So there are people I've heard of that just stopped cold turkey and never again, and that's great. Um, but I do think that's that's the minority of folks seeking help or treatment.
Mm.
Um, so it wasn't looking good. Yeah, the doctors. I would drink 20 to 30 drinks. I mean, when I enrolled in that clinical trial, and I'd try to cut back the drinking, so I would, because then work picked up too at this time. So I was doing well at work, and I was afraid that, you know, I didn't want interfering with work. And think I was in my mid 20s when I stopped. I was still young, 25. So I got lucky there. And uh, so I was trying to kind of plan out my drinking better, because I couldn't really cut back the drinking. But I could space out the days between drinks. That was
Mm.
easier for me to do. So if I knew, and I would look at my calendar and I'd see what 3-day weekends are coming up, because it would take me, I wouldn't just be hungover for a day. I'd get, pretty beat up from drinking, that it would take me a day or two to recover.
Right.
So I would really need it. I could just go out on a Friday and then come and work on a Monday, like totally fine. I'd need that extra day to really dry out, or, find God or something.
And just
But
to clarify something that you mentioned a minute or two ago, am I
yeah,
right that it was 20 to 30 drinks a day that you were consuming,
yeah,
primarily cocktails, if I remember correctly?
yeah, yeah. So it was, and I was looking at my sheet that I filled out, and I think it was 23 drinks that I was averaging when I enrolled in that trial. And so I was like spacing that out, and that was like me working and like calm down.
Hmm.
And
John,
not to, I wasn't,
that's an average of 23 drinks per day spread out over
yeah,
time.
yeah. So like in any given time that I was drinking, that's what I would consume. So I don't
Hmm.
know how I think I needed to count my drinks up. Right, I kept track of
Hmm.
what I would drink when I enrolled in the clinical trial, and but I was trying to be on good behavior, so that was like lower than, it was 22.7. Um, what what I averaged, and so it was like me trying to. I'm like, okay, I'm doing this clinical trial. I'll get, I'm feeling healthy. I'm getting my act together. Um, so yeah, it was a lot. And I think I was in the 95th or 97th percentile for alcohol consumption. Um, so that they were like, good thing you're young, because no, they did blood work and everything. And I'm like, great, I'm going to die or something. But because they were looking if anything was, any long-term impact, health impacts that, from all this drinking. But I was so young and I hadn't been, I mean, that's decades and decades and decades of drinking, like, that, or so it's, I got lucky there that there wasn't anything physically um, wrong from or any damage, short term or long term physically. So,
You
but
said that very likely if not for this experience that we're going to talk about, you would be dead. And what was the major risk for you if you would have continued? Is it organ failure? Is it cognitive decline? Is it all of the above? What likely would have eventually killed you if you would have continued at that pace?
yeah, so the doctors were concerned about organ failure, I think. I know they were concerned, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but they were concerned about that. I know they were also concerned about seizures.
Hmm.
Not all, seizures aren't. They can be deadly for sure. I mean, if you can avoid them, that's the best thing to do. But they were concerned that because I would drink so much and then just stop, that would be an issue. I'd have a seizure, and you know that would not be good. But I think it was internal bleeding too was another one I heard. Um, but they were just like flat out, they listed a bunch of things, and and I was getting DTs occasionally, delirium tremors is what they call them. So the DTs, and I remember the doctor told me, he's like, I get these with my like 40-year-old patients that have been like, those guys are young and I'm concerned about them. And they've been drinking for decades. So he was like, you were the youngest person I've seen getting these. And this is like multiple addiction um, specialists
Mm.
saying that I was just on a I was just drinking way too much in a short amount of time, and there was no way it was going to be sustainable. So they were just concerned.
What is a delirium tremor?
It's so the side effect. So it's with withdrawal of
Mm.
alcohol, and you could have hallucinations. You could see things kind of like flashing. A big thing is shaking, and so like the shakes.
Yeah.
That's and I was getting that, and I was just like, I'm like, this is not. And I would need to drink in the morning to calm my nerves, and not all the time, just like if it was really bad. Like if I woke up with like a terrible hangover and I'm shaking, that's really the only way to stop it that I know of. Or um, the different benzodiazepines. I
Mm.
think that type of drug that um, they'll give it to you to kind of wean off the drinking so you don't get a seizure. But then those are highly addictive
Mm.
in themselves. Um, so or can be. So it's a slippery slope. But I remember, sometimes they would have to write me a prescription of just a few pills, not like a whole pill bottle of 90 or whatever it is. They would give me like two or three to kind of wean me off that hangover.
Mm.
Um, so I mean, that was not fun. And it was just awful. And you're like dry heaving, you're throwing up bile, like everything's out of your system. I mean, it's the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the trial itself. And I'd love to hear from you about what you remember about um, its existence, who told you, what your thoughts were. In
Yeah.
preparation for this, I watched other interviews that you've given, and I know that you were terrified of psychedelics, or at least had no experiences with
Yeah.
them, were scared of their potential bad trips or bad experiences on them. What do you remember about who brought this idea to you in the first place, and how that unfolded where you actually ended up enrolling?
Yeah. No, great question. Can I smoke in here?
Please.
Or, um, great question. And yeah, no, I was terrified. And it was a lot of that was a kid that I knew, grew up in the city, really bright kid, one of the smartest kids, great athlete, um, got along with everyone. Uh, he unfortunately passed away.
Hmm.
And the, I don't know if the rumor, just the story going around was that he was on mushrooms, magic mushrooms,
Hmm.
and he walked out of his window and fell to his death, unfortunately. So that terrified me. I've also had experiences when friends would call me to come for me to go pick them up because they were having a bad trip.
Hmm.
And I'm like, these guys sound awful. I'm like, why would anyone? I never understood it, and I still kind of don't. Of people doing this recreationally, if there's like a tiny percent, a small chance of them having a hell realm, terrible, frightening experience. I'm like, even if the 99% of the times that you do this drug are great, that 1% risk is just too much for me.
Hmm.
So I was always afraid of it. I had no idea what I was getting into, but at the time, we're just totally out of options. And my parents were like, I don't know. And my parents are pretty against. My mom would always like scare. She's like, don't do any drugs. There's like heroin in the pot now, or like angel dust. Angel dust was a big thing when we were growing up. Those were on the commercials. And then she'd go to the Halloween candy. We'd go trick or treating. Like there's, I mean, if fentanyl were prevalent back then, forget it. She wouldn't let us leave the house, maybe. But so she was always like telling us not to do drugs or like just scare, like don't do it, don't. And that she was right. But uh, so she switched her doctors. This doctor from NYU, Lisa Durso, was great. And I guess my mom told her like the stress she was dealing with me, like they were worried about me. So then Dr. Durso, I think, stumbled upon this clinical trial that NYU, because she was an NYU doctor, that Steve Ross and Dr. Ross and Dr. Bogenschutz were getting ready to launch. So I tracked down Steve Ross. They weren't recruiting participants yet. So I saw him a bit like in his private practice, and he was one of the best, if not the best guy I saw in a private practice. I mean, he was really good. He was I never felt like whenever I would slip up, he never made me feel guilty about it. It was kind of like, okay, let's delve into it. What do you think happened? How do you think we prevent this,
Hmm.
from going forward? And like what, so he was really good. And then they started recruiting for patients, and I'm like, can we do this? And I think he was a little hesitant because I was so young. I was the youngest person, I think, in that trial. The cutoff age was 25, or you have to be 25 to enter, and I was 25. So I got lucky there by making it.
And John, not to cut you up, but when you say it, what did you know about the trial? What are the details that you knew about related to the trial itself?
All I knew is that it was psilocybin, and I'd never heard of psilocybin. And then you look into it, and it's one of the compounds in psychedelic mushrooms. So then I'm like, okay, it. So that's all I knew. I
And
thought,
it was for addiction, right? Specifically, was it for alcohol or other
no,
addictions?
it was for alcohol.
Hmm.
So, and they call it alcohol use disorder,
Hmm.
which is alcoholism. Um, so I knew it was psilocybin. None of us knew what psilocybin was, and then we looked it up, and we're like, okay. But I mean, you're not breaking any laws. You're doing it with a top tier research team and medical team at NYU Langone. So that was, I was like, yeah, I was worried about doing this, but I was out of all other options, and it was with a great medical team of real people that I trusted, not some, you know, wacky people trying to feed me drugs in a dark alley.
Mm.
And it was great that it was in a hospital setting. I'm like, great, okay, if anything goes wrong, I'm in a hospital. And so I'm like, okay, great. I mean, it was still nerve-wracking, like going into it, but I mean, I knew the alternative was just, I was so frustrated and just tired and beat down from trying to manage the alcohol and figuring out ways to like that. I'm like, I'm either going to kill it or it's going to kill me.
Mm.
So what's it going to be? So I tried this, and I went in like head for. I'm like, I'm not going to regret this. It was scary, but I'm like, I need to try. If I don't try this, I'm out of options.
Now my understanding about the trial, it was a double blind trial. So you
Yeah,
don't know, right? It's essentially a 50-50 coin flip whether or not you're going to actually
yeah,
get the psilocybin in your session.
yeah.
Um, prior to enrolling this, were you bordering on hopelessness? I mean, were you viewing yourself essentially as a broken man who likely would be dead if some act intervened or some therapy intervened that allowed you to persevere? How was your psychology at that time?
I mean, it depends what day you caught me on. There would be
Yeah.
days where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be fine. I'll do this. But then there were just days that I was, that I'd be afraid of my future self. I'm like, okay, I know I didn't drink today, but I have no clue what I'm going to do tomorrow or next week. And then I'm thinking about like, what if I have a wife and kids? And then I just like slip up and like things like that. So I was just, and I guess it was kind of like the whole school, the stress with school and stuff too, of like, this sucks, but it's life. Like
Mm.
that, like I'm gonna have to deal with this and I'm gonna have to live with this forever. So I always pictured alcohol like that. Like, okay, I'm always gonna have to deal with this. I'm gonna have to deal with these cravings when they pop up occasionally, but I'll manage, I'll figure it out. And so I was confident that I could do it. And then like some days I would just really second guess if like this is going to be a roll of the dice.
Mm.
I don't know what's going to happen, but it's not, it's a pretty unsettling feeling, um knowing that you could just have one relapse and your whole life's over and everything you've worked for. So
Mm.
because I've heard of those stories a lot, especially in AA, and it's like the guys that were in their 50s or 60s and with like a lot more to lose, families, careers that have been established. And so just hearing that, I'm like, this is frightening.
Mm.
So
Tell me about that day when you went in there and the setting. I think for many people who listen to this will be the time they've heard about this kind of therapy. And I'd love for to give you an opportunity to talk about what you remember about the setting, the experience itself. What do you remember about doing it?
they did this in Bellevue Hospital, and Bellevue's kind of got that, it's like an old New York hospital. I think they had, a lot of mental uh, disorders. Their patients with like a lot of mental disorders, like, um, so a lot going on in that hospital. And the room itself within the hospital, the doctors made it, they had like a couch, they had some paintings up, some like flower pots. So they wanted to give it more of a comfortable feel, not like a, but and I mentioned this earlier, I'm a hypochondriac. So like a sterile, white walled, like hospital setting is very comfortable for me.
Hmm.
I would have thrived in that environment, but they kind of try to make it look almost like a living room.
Hmm.
Um, so, but the majority of this treatment is psychotherapy. So they're doing, but it's 2-on-1. So it's like two. It's an MD psychiatrist, and then usually either a PhD or a social worker, a licensed social worker or something, a therapist. So you'll have two, basically two therapists to one patient. Um, and the majority of this is psychotherapy. So I went in for like over a month on a weekly basis doing these talk therapy sessions with them, and it wasn't anything new. It was kind of just like, you know, talking about the drinking, talking about what changes I want to make, talking about, you know, all of that and trying to figure out how to resolve this issue. Um, and then just one of these sessions is an all day, they block it out from like 8 in the morning to 4 or 5 p.m. And it's what they call the medication session. So you do your, medication session, you do it in the morning, and you're basically, should I run back to play it back to like walk you through that specific day of the medication session? Because I think that's what people are probably most curious about.
I'd love to hear that. Yeah.
So I had 3 of these sessions over the course of the year-long clinical trial. So, but they're all pretty much the same. You walk in, they drug test you. They want to make
Hmm.
sure nothing's in your system. They ask you not to drink. I think it was 11 days. They asked me, don't drink 11 days prior to the medication session. So I literally looked at the calendar and then counted backwards 11 days and circled that date. And I'm like, this is the last night I'm going to get bombed.
Hmm.
And it happened to be my sister's birthday too. I didn't see that. I just drank alone. And it was great. It was one of the more enjoyable times. It was a great send off. I mean, I really couldn't have written it up any better. Um, and it was one of the times that the recent, like towards the end of my drinking career, um, I didn't get that much anxiety after, or regret or guilt. So it was interesting. And it was maybe because I knew that I was going to go into this first session and I'm like, listen, if it works, great. If not, well, I'm out of options. But so I think maybe because that was in the back of my mind. So I didn't drink 11 days prior, and then you go in, they drug test you, and then they ask you, to state out loud, what do you want to get out of this? So state your intention. And I said, I knew I was there for my drinking, but I'm like, I think it's like deeper than that. I don't know why because when I'm not drinking, I was just miserable. And then when I was drinking, I didn't want to be drinking, and I was miserable when I was drinking. That wasn't fun anymore. So those were the only 2 worlds that I knew. And so my intention was, I got to get inner peace. I got to find an inner peace, calm down. And, and that ended up working. So I took so then they give you the pill. So it's psilocybin, it's pharmaceutical grade psilocybin. I've never
Hmm.
taken mushrooms.
Hmm.
This isn't ground up mushrooms in a pill. This is pharmaceutical grade, pure psilocybin. So, and this is what they call a heroic dose. So it's a high, I think it's double a recreational dose. So I took that, and then like 30 minutes later, laid down on the couch, put the blindfold on, put headphones on with like classical music, and kind of just laid down on the couch waiting for this to kick in. And then I started noticing, because of the eye mask, my biggest concern was, am I not going to be able to differentiate reality and, what's going on with these hallucinations popping up? And I thought my biggest fear was like, I'm just going to see these like demonic things that are just popping up, and I think they're real life, and I'm not going to, what am I going to do? And and I think Bogenschutz was like, yeah, that's a possibility that could. And I'm like, what the? But I'm like, okay. So that was my concern. But I think because I had the eye mask on, I thought it would be a lot more of a visual experience, but it wasn't as visual as I had anticipated. It was more, the best way I could describe it. And before, like when I asked how the cancer patients did, because they did a study with cancer patients with end of life uh, anxiety, and I asked, what they thought, and the doctors they said, some of them face some challenging stuff, and others, they're basically ups and downs for a lot of that, if not all. So, um, I gave it a whirl, and I had the eye mask on, and then I started realizing there were these. It was like looking through a kaleidoscope almost, but it didn't really. I thought it would hit me like a bag of like a ton of bricks. That, okay, now I'm under the influence of psychedelics, but it didn't. It kind of crept in
Hmm.
slowly. So I started seeing these kaleidoscopic, is that a word?
Yeah.
Shapes. Um, and then it kind of started, like over time, started getting stronger, and the effects started amplifying. And I realized that, and also what the doctor said was that those cancer, a lot of them couldn't really describe what they went through,
Hmm.
because what they called it as explaining the ineffable. Like you can't explain it. You don't know. You don't have any context. There are no words to describe these experiences. And I was a journalist at the time, so I thought that was one of the dumbest things I've heard. That you go through something, you're living through something firsthand. You go through this experience, and you can't put it into words. And yeah, I didn't buy it until I went through it, and it's a thing. And I think it is because we don't have, the proper context for it, and there probably just aren't words in the English language that can define what you're going through during these states. And so what this did was it really amplified emotions. That's the
Hmm.
best way I could describe it too. Like if
Hmm.
you're happy, you're ecstatic. If you're, sad or scared, that really exacerbates those emotions and feelings. It's like a, roller coaster on steroids of just the ups and downs. And and I did have a couple of visuals, obviously, like what I told you earlier, when I was in the desert in one of these instances, and there was a glass liquor bottle in the desert, and then all of a sudden the liquor bottle disintegrated into the sand, and I just thought that was I thought it was corny, cliche. I'm like, I couldn't have thought of like a more clever thing in my subconscious. Like I was embarrassed about that. And I didn't want to tell the doctors. I'm like, they don't need to know about this. um, but I mean, at that point, I thought, I was like, okay, I think this is my alcoholism leaving me. Um, and I hadn't drank since that first session. Um, and then the second session, similar setup where you go in, you get drug tested, then you state your intention. I don't know if I had the same intention or not. I don't think I did, because by that point, I was pretty certain I wasn't going to drink again.
Hmm.
And I remember going into the doctor's office the day after and telling them, if I left this clinical trial and just didn't show up and never saw you guys ever again and didn't do these last two sessions, I think there's a very good chance that I don't drink again.
Hmm.
But I obviously finished the clinical trial. The second session, the big thing there was a death experience. I had like a wacky death experience. It was very strange, but ironically, it was the most peaceful part out of all of these um, 3 sessions combined. That was like, I just kind of felt, I don't know, it could have been just like killing off the past, or like the things I wanted to change and stop doing,
Hmm.
and kind of starting a clean slate. And then I told the doc the next day. So you go in the next day, or at least I did, to tell the doctors what you saw, what you experienced, what you think it all means. Um, and they speak with you about it, and I remember telling them, it's not real. It's not even like a new chapter. This is like a totally new book.
Hmm.
It's just totally different. And so like the new beginnings of like that, and the new trajectory that I had in life, it wasn't even just like a new chapter. It was like, no, that book is done. This is a totally different book that we're starting. And that was the best way I could describe it. Of and I think that is true. I mean, I'm still the same guy. Like when I see, and some of my friends didn't know I was going through this, and even though I'm convinced I told them, and
Hmm.
they just didn't realize it. But there have been guys that I've seen since after the clinical trial, and they didn't even realize I stopped drinking, because I haven't changed. And that's what I was worried about. I was worried that, am I going to go crazy? Am I going to lose my sense of humor? Am I going to be antisocial? Am I going to, and I had all these concerns that I was going to, I thought I was walking into a lobotomy. I
Hmm.
thought that I didn't know what psychedelics did to your brain. Um, so I had concerns, but it didn't, it's crazy. That's pretty much the only thing that it addressed, and it took care of. It was the urge to drink. And so since then, this was back in 2015, I haven't had an urge to drink, no cravings. I know I'm not going to drink. I've picked up the wrong drink multiple times over the years, and have drank alcohol, like had a sip, and it did nothing for me. Whereas in the past, before this, if I had done that, I probably would have justified that with, I just relapsed. And I probably would have used that as an excuse to start drinking again. So it's really remarkable that, and I went for, this was my favorite thing to do, even though it was my least favorite thing to do as well, because it was destroying my life. But it was the thing I was just dependent on. I just wanted to keep doing it and figure out how to make it work. And it just took that away. That that kind of magnetic pull that it had over me. And I'm still in New York, so I'm walking by, 3 liquor stores and 2 bars every block,
Hmm.
and it doesn't not once cross my mind. And my wife she's a social drinker, so sometimes people will give us wine and stuff, and she doesn't drink that much. So if she opens a bottle of wine, it's in the fridge forever. So, and then she'll travel for work or something, um, or a wedding that she has to go to that I got out of, and it'll just, be a bottle of wine in the fridge. And that, I mean, in the past, that'll just, that would have been torture. But it's crazy how this clinical trial changed my perspective on alcohol, to where I'm just totally indifferent about it.
You used the word ineffable earlier in the lack of the words in the English language that can describe that experience. And, you know, I know how involved you've gotten in this research and in this advocacy work since that experience that you had. But as best you understand it, as best you can explain it, how do you make sense of what happened to you? To many people who hear these stories, this seems like magic. And I'd love to hear your response to what you think happened as best you understand it.
So that's a great question. And I had linked up with the doctors a couple of years after I had last seen him and left the clinical trial. And I went up to them and I wanted to ask them what they thought happened. Like, how do they think this worked? Because it worked. And this surpassed my greatest expectations. I thought the best outcome for me after this clinical trial was that it was going to help me manage my cravings. But not in a million years would I think that it would totally eliminate all the cravings to a point where, I mean, it's like I never had an issue with alcohol. It's crazy. And no urge to drink now. So, but before I could ask them that, they asked me, "Hey, how do you think this worked?" And I'm like, you're the doctor." I'm like, "You're the guy. You're doing the research." But I think so. What it did for me was it also, right, with magnifying and amplifying these emotions. So it was a lot, kind of a guilt trip too, with the shame. I felt terrible what this was doing to my parents, and that was the first time I had really understood what they were going through trying to get me help. Because the whole time I was drinking, I thought I was just hurting myself.
Hmm.
No one else is drinking. I'm doing this to my own body. I'm not getting behind the wheel of a car or anything. I'm literally just physically harming myself. And I was, you know, anyone getting any physical harm from the drinking, it was me. Um, but I didn't know that they were probably suffering more than I was, because they were just watching this helpless and with like sober eyes, just seeing this crystal clear, and the ending didn't look good. It was like a slow motion car crash that they couldn't do anything about.
Yeah.
So seeing that, coming to that realization, in these sessions was probably enough for me to just say, what are you doing? Like, you're so lucky to have the best parents, the best family, the greatest friends. It's like, what are you doing? You got everything going for you. Don't mess this up. And enjoy. And a lot of people, talk about gratitude and stuff. That definitely helped me focus. And okay, wow. And I thought I had problems. Like, no way. Like, I have a great life. I need to get my act together. I need to be thankful for all these things that I have. So it was, I think how it worked was it gave me a perspective shift. So that's why it didn't change my personality. It didn't change, my sense of humor. It didn't change anything like that. But it did change my relationship with alcohol. And that's because I think it shifted my perspective on, basically we know what road, if we go down this road, we know what the outcome is going to be. And it's not worth it in a million years. So just to realize that, it's almost like, picking up Drano and just drinking that. I might as well do that. And I wouldn't want to do that. So it's not like I'm anti-alcohol. I'm not a prohibitionist. It's not on my radar anymore. And that's why and it's just still remarkable, like thinking about this, however many years later, how well this worked and the sustaining results from this as well. And I think it got better over time, which is a weird thing because medication usually wears off over time. And just like the other possibilities, what else? I mean, the research is so young that who knows what else is out there, and what else this could help treat. So, I mean, we're pretty sure this works for substance use. So I'm convinced this would help with the opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's way bigger than just substance use and alcohol. And I mean, it could help a lot more people with different mental and behavioral health disorders, in my view.
I think this is how we got connected in the first place and became friends is we share that view that this, for so many people who are at the end of their rope and are really suffering and qualify for this sort of medically supervised intervention and therapy, it could be the best thing that they've ever done for themselves, for their health, for their families, for everyone. And do you use the word or think that the word cured is accurate for you personally?
Yeah, for me personally, but I mean, like that's the whole thing for me, I was the best outcome coming out of this. Took away all my cravings, worked the very first time. I haven't touched a drink since. I haven't touched psilocybin or psychedelics since. I haven't wanted to go back and score them off the street. So this worked. I went in there, did this a few times, and I was done. So yeah, for me, it was a cure, because if this isn't a cure, I don't know what else would be, or how else you would explain a cure. And I don't say that lightly, because a lot of people are, especially in the world of substance use, not just alcohol use disorder, but substance use broadly. It's a disease that people look at it, and I did too, and I probably still would if I didn't go through this firsthand. But it's a disease that people view it with that that person living with it has to live with it for the rest of their lives, and they need to manage it. So they need to go to meetings, or they need to, just be on top of that. And that's like a full-time job in itself. I mean, it's tiring, and it's really tough. I mean, I almost explain it. Well, you're a pitcher pitching a perfect game, and you're in the bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, or top of the ninth, if a perfect game and you're winning. Top of the ninth, 2 outs. You just need one more out, and you give up the hit. And I mean, is that whole game really spoiled? Is, even though you get the win, but that's kind of how a lot of folks look at sobriety. Of this guy had 15 years, this guy had 10 years, 20 years, but he relapsed, and all that's down the drain, and he's got to go back to counting days and start over again. I'm like, what kind of world is this, when this is this is what we're dealing with, and we don't have better options, and we look at that as a failure. And it's definitely an unfortunate event when that does happen, but that's the frustration. It's like constantly having to go undefeated, or pitching perfect games, or constantly every day for the rest of your life. And it's grueling, and it's, very tiring. And I think that's why it just doesn't work for the vast majority of people, because it's not sustainable.
Yeah. Jon, I would love to do another interview about your advocacy work and all of the incredible work, which we haven't even touched on, in the future, to go into the details of Apollo Pact and the caucus at the federal level that I know you're deeply involved with your mother-in-law.
Whenever you want,
I would love to do that. I want to say there are a couple other things I'd love to ask you, but I mean, I personally, I would love to just, tell you, I mean, one of the things I've always admired about you is your openness in sharing so candidly your own story, because I feel like I know just from being friends with you that this hasn't always been the easiest thing to do, and to go on 60 Minutes and talk to Anderson Cooper, and to know that everyone who ever meets you, or many of them, will know what you've been through. But that, in my mind, that kind of courage is how people learn and realize that they're not alone, and realize that there might be hope for them. And I just want to commend you for that, because I've always really respected how you've handled yourself with that publicly, since everything that you went through. And I would love to maybe close with a couple things that we could touch on. I mean, one is, for people that are listening to this potentially, that are where you were in 2014 or 2015 or whenever it was, I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk to those people directly, and maybe speak first about what you know about the efficacy rates, the success rates of these sort of medically supervised clinical trials for psilocybin, and then also anything else you might convey to them, to try to give them reason for hope. And I think we're both interested in this fundamentally from a position of wanting to reduce suffering, unnecessary suffering, and try to help people have better lives. That's a mouthful. I'll leave it there to give you any commentary you might have on that.
Yeah. And well, first of all, right back at you. You're one of the smartest guys I know, and very admirable that you're just constantly striving to improve yourself and learn new things, and you have a curious mind, and you're always trying to improve yourself on a daily basis, and that's something I admire about you. So On the other hand, with these, the folks out there, your other question, they can reach out to me directly, and I mean, that's a big part of what I do. The efficacy from these trials range from 60% to 80%. So whether it's psilocybin assisted therapy for anxiety, psilocybin assisted therapy for major depressive disorder, psilocybin for substance use. I know, so they've done this for cocaine use disorder at University of Alabama at Birmingham, UAB, with Peter Hendricks down there. He's great. And they're doing another trial for smoking cessation. So this works for, cigarette smoking, addiction. And that's in itself is very difficult to quit. And the efficacy there was about 80%, I think. And the leading method right now is about 30%. So it's more than double. Granted, small sample size and, still in research phase, but still very exciting. And they're doing those clinical trials that just got an NIH grant, so government funded. So that's huge that the government is starting to fund this stuff. Alcohol use, that was the one I was in. They're doing this at the University of Wisconsin for opiates, for methamphetamine use disorder. So they're really, getting these trials going. But don't, for people struggling, don't give up. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Just try to, and I'm never pushing this or preaching with, that everyone should do this and, go down this road. But if they are out of options, if you are out of options, if you've tried everything, if you have nothing else to, no other methods, no other treatments that you can explore, I would certainly, you have nothing to lose. I would certainly explore looking at clinical trials. You could go to clinicaltrials.gov and search all of the clinical trials there. You could go to apollopact.org and reach out to me directly, and I will walk you through how to get to those clinical trials. But it is certainly worth exploring, and it is certainly worth talking to anyone on those medical teams and clinical teams that are conducting these clinical trials to learn more from them. Those are real doctors, they're real clinicians, they're properly trained medical professionals, they're doing FDA clinical trials. That's the best way to do it. So you got nothing else to lose.
Maybe my last question, Jon, will be
go for it.
Twofold. One, and I'll include this in the notes of the episode, but what is the best way for them to reach you personally? And second, I just leave it open-ended for anything else that we haven't covered that you wish we would have, to speak on any subject related to this entire journey you've been on and the knowledge you now have. If anything comes to mind, you're welcome to speak on anything that you think is worthy of a final comment.
Yeah, I did this in a clinical setting, so I don't want to give people the false notion that you could just do this by yourself and it'll be risk free. You should be doing this with a medical team there. Clinical trials are the best route to go, in my opinion. I think they're the safest. And what was your first question? The contact?
Yeah.
Or they could email me at hello@apollopact.org. And or just go to the site and fill out one of those forms there if you're looking for a trial too. But I'm fairly easy to get a hold of, and I try to be as easy as possible to do that, because I've been, in a lot of situations where I needed help myself and wanted to get to people and figure out, how do I learn more about, uh, you know, bettering myself. So I try to be. It shouldn't be difficult to find me if you
Yep.
go to apollopack.org.
Jon, that is an absolutely amazing story. I mean, I think you've already done, but will do incredible work with your career in this entire field. I mean, I think I probably speak for everyone who knows you that I'm glad that the addiction has been kicked, obviously. And again, just mad respect for what you've done with everything afterwards. I think to me, that's one of the best things. I would never wish suffering upon anyone, but if you're able to figure out a way to break it, you can teach other people or be a guidepost for others. And that's exactly what you're doing, man. So I just want to say thank you again for doing this. I've wanted to record this story since I heard it, a couple of years ago. So thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. It's always great catching up, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Maybe next week out there.
That'd be great. Thanks, buddy.
Awesome. Thank you.